very sad. And I know I just want to share this because I think a lot of women experience this. If anything, I overproduced because I wanted to prove that I could still do everything. And I was up in the night feeding a baby.
Hi, I'm Kelly Kessler, and I'm the host of the podcast, Rewiring Health. Whether you're an entrepreneur who feels like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, trying to juggle all aspects of business, or you're a corporate employee who feels like you're pulled in multiple directions, trying to excel and meet deadlines, or you're a passionate parent who feels like you pour your heart and soul into your children and there's not much left for you, you're in the right place. This podcast is designed to give you tools, tips, and strategies around how you can cultivate balance within your life, feel energized and present, and stop feeling like you're compromising your health and inner harmony. I am so glad you're here. The demands of your work, other people, and endless to-do lists can easily make you put yourself last. If you've ever struggled to prioritize yourself or honor your needs, this episode will show you the simple steps to doing just that, so you can trust yourself and feel more joy in your life. I have the honor of sitting down with Whitney Baker. Whitney Baker is the founder of Electric Ideas, with a mission to generate momentum of personal breakthrough that light women up and a new sense of possibility. She is a certified meditation teacher, group facilitator, and host of the globally ranked Electric Ideas podcast. This was such a great conversation, and I'm so excited to share it with you. Welcome back to another episode of Rewiring Health. Very honored to be joined by Whitney Baker. So thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to be here.
Yes. So I always love to hear what brought you to what you do today, because there's always a backstory of the journey that a lot of times we take and when we're helping people, especially. So do you mind sharing your story and what brought you to what you do today and who you help today?
Oh, I'd love to share my story. I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
So I was someone who, from a young age, always felt like I wanted to contribute to the world. I'd always been called to kind of share my voice and do good. And at a point in my career, I thought journalism school was the outlet for me. And I happened to graduate from journalism school during the economic meltdown, and there were no jobs available. And it was a major time of what now I can understand is scarcity for me. Yeah. And that scarcity mindset got very ingrained in me. Mm-hmm. So I ended up beginning work at a creative and PR agency. And I was just so grateful to have something consistent in a job. I was sick of that feeling. So I ended up building my career up there and just honestly being grateful for that stability. Years into that role, I had my first child. And it kind of rocked my world because agencies are not known for great work-life balance. They kind of say they're like working dog years. Yeah. And so that was a wake-up call. And then, surprise, I was pregnant again. So I had two daughters 14 months apart. And it was a blessing, but it was just a lot to juggle. And so I worked, I feel like everyone has their own kind of work and motherhood story, but I feel like I felt really frustrated because I felt like so many of my friends and people in my community were like, I have to work. That's me. I want to do it full time. And then some of the other ones were so resolute and I'm taking time off. Motherhood is the only, and I just was stuck in this very murky middle. And I tried working 5 days. My company actually was wonderful. They worked with me to try 4 days, then 3 days, which had been unprecedented. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, all the issues are going to be solved. I can be the best in both worlds now. And it was awful because I just was eclipsed in what I could do at work. And I felt like everything, I really wasn't able to be present at home. Mm-hmm. So I kind of hit a low point and I was really burning out. I was doing the wake up, work before I wake up my kids or exercise. I kind of had abandoned myself in so many ways. And it finally led to a sense of I can't go on like this. And I quit. And instead of, I've forgiven myself now because I've done a lot of work since. Yeah. But instead of giving myself that time to kind of pause and reflect, I was working on my freelancing resume the day after I quit work. Mm-hmm. I put tons of pressure on myself to not lose my footing.
Mhm.
And eventually I wasn't getting kind of the freelance gigs that I wanted. So I hired a career coach to kind of help me position myself, or I don't know. I'd never heard of a coach before then, to be honest. I
Yeah.
stumbled across them. I'm like, okay, I'll try this. And after not that long of time, it became very clear that one of the reasons I wasn't getting the opportunities is because I didn't want them.
Mhm.
With the lens of unraveling my nervous system and myself from that very treadmill, go, go, go mentality, and proactively creating a little bit of space to do some things that I'd really abandoned, culminated with talking to someone who was a reflective mirror. And I really realized that I'd gone too far down a path that didn't serve me.
Mhm.
And so I'll pause there because
Yeah.
it's a
Oh
long
my God.
story.
I feel like there's so many people who can relate to that story where it's like you're doing everything you think you should be doing. You're just going all the time, trying to be 100% in every aspect of your life and then losing yourself in the process. And I know I can very much relate to that too. It's like balance seems so foreign in those times. Harmony seems so foreign because you're just going all the time. How did you start to cultivate that in your life? Like, I know you talked about leaving that and then going in your own direction, but like, how did you start to get yourself back in a place where your nervous system was like unraveling and like things were feeling, or rather going back into a place of balance? But how did you start to get yourself back in that state where you could see things more clearly?
Right. Well, something I read that really stuck with me during that time, because I just felt like I was in this weird murky middle. Like I had so much expression and talent, to be honest, and passion, and I wanted to do more in the world, and I just couldn't find the right vehicle. And I was also scared to quit something that I'd built up, especially during a time where I was stretched with two little kids, because starting something new sounded awful. To be honest, I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
So something that I did that really started to help me is to think about my life and some of these job paths I was considering. I was like, what about that is lighting me up, and how can I start building it right now, like today? So I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a really simple example. I was craving intellectual stimulation, adult conversation, and an outlet for learning and growth that I wasn't able to have in my day to day. So, for example, I joined a classics book club. It was pretty much just retired history and English teachers, and I was like the youngest by a few decades, but it started to light me up, and it just was one small way that I kind of started reconnecting with these pieces of myself that I had abandoned.
I love that. And it's just like something that you don't realize the breadcrumbs, like once one thing opens up, you don't know what other doors going to open up from that. But it's like taking a chance on doing something outside of what you normally do. That's absolutely amazing. And just going back to what you were saying before, when you were talking about like, you can't go back to that lifestyle, you can't go back to that job. It's so profound, because once you leave it and you get that space, I think sometimes you feel that energy. It's like where your energy is just not resonating with that anymore. And it feels like that dread, like I can never do that again. And how did you start moving in a direction where, you said that things were vibrating with you? So you went to the book club, and then how did you then take that to open more opportunity for yourself?
Yeah. So I think I was reading a lot. I was taking classes. I also really leaned into my meditation practice. I did a 2-week intensive where I really learned how to practice and deepen my practice. And that turned into a transformative practice for me. And that's why it's a foundational tool for how I help my clients. One of many tools that helped me, but something that gave me a consistent anchor to start to turn within and self-trust. I'll give you an example. When I was kind of finally getting emotionally close to cutting the cord with my old industry, I remember, when you have those kind of interviews or projects that you're like, oh, I'm a shoe in. I had a big project, and it was like, I thought I was going to get it, and they called and they're like, "Sorry, we went a different direction." And my whole body felt a wash of relief. I did not want to do that anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
it hit me so hard that I couldn't not listen.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And it's like ironic because probably in the past you would have like not felt like that, right? You would have felt like almost very disappointed. And so it's like the transfer in emotions where you're feeling like, oh, good, like that door's shutting for a reason. It's amazing, like that transformation. Why do you think, I know you've talked about abandoning yourself. Why do you think it's for so many people to abandon themselves? I know I've been there. Many people I care for deeply have abandoned themselves in the process of achievement too. Why do you think people do that from your experience?
That is such a great question. And I feel like it can go so many ways. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a combination of how you were raised, the messages society tells us. So I was raised by two very high achieving parents. Both of my parents are like type A and like always doing productive seeming things. And so I will say that rest and doing things just to do them was not modeled for me when I was young. And so it's taken me doing my own investigation as an adult just to recognize that
Mm-hmm.
and give myself a little compassion. I also honestly feel like women in my generation are kind of sold this message of you can do anything you want, but we haven't figured out the equilibrium yet. Because when you think about it, yeah, go work, go chase your dreams, do all this stuff. But even this week, today, I have a sick child home, and it dramatically impacted my ability to create space to feel good and to be productive. Yeah. So I think that we are taught as women still that we can't show that we need support or that we're not 100%. I mean, I remember coming back from my maternity leaves, and it was culturally unheard of to show that you were tired or that you were less than. If anything, I was wired. It's very sad. And I know I just want to share this because I think a lot of women experience this. If anything, I overproduced because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to prove that I could still do everything. And I was up in the night feeding a baby. I remember just feeling sorry for myself. I was laid down and put my timer on 2 minutes on the cold tile floor in the pump room of my office and just laid there and closed my eyes because I was so darn tired, but I knew I needed to present in a half an hour.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's just like it breaks my heart because it's like there's that dichotomy where you're like you're very human, but yet there's this like where you're supposed to be a machine and you're supposed to
Yes.
just do things without resting. You don't need to rejuvenate. Like there's no plug in for us. Like the plug in is that time down. So it's like you're expected to go without ever plugging yourself in. You know, we don't expect that of our phones, but yet we expect it for humans. And it's very sad. And especially as a mom, because there's a lot going on, new mom, there's going on top of the regular work, but it's just like mentally, emotionally, you're trying to be everything for everyone. And it just wears on you in all aspects of your life. So it's, yeah, 2 minutes, like what, it's just, it breaks your heart. Like that's all that you could give yourself at that time. And it's like nothing, no fault of yours, but like you look back on those moments, are like, oh, like I deserve better than that for myself. I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I've gone through a lot of processes of just really coming to a place of peace and forgiveness of that version of myself who
Yeah.
didn't know better. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the tools. My whole nervous system had been sucked into this like um, fight or flight mode. And I was just always kind of in that. I was waking up in the night. I had anxiety and it felt terrible. And honestly, it felt like something was wrong with me, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really took years of unwinding to recognize that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of times these conversations don't happen, so you don't realize that everybody else is going through this. And so you may look at everybody's external appearance and be like, well, they're doing it, they're handling it. What's wrong with me that I can't do this? But meanwhile, behind closed doors, a lot of people are probably experiencing exactly what you're experiencing, but it's like faux pas to discuss it and say that, like, I'm struggling, I need help, I need a moment. And that is a problem. It's a cultural problem, societal, but it's also this like workaholic culture where it's like you're just expected to produce without ever taking care of yourself. And that's a major issue when we talk about longevity and just health and harmony within ourselves. A huge issue.
I'm so with you. And I feel like we're also guinea pigs of navigating being on demand with technology. Pile that on. And I try to now, I have practices and I hope, a healthy relationship because I'm very intentional and boundaried. But back then it just felt like everything was blurred together and I was constantly available to everybody else's needs but my own.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you're so right, because there's no stop. Like, you don't leave work and you're done with work. There's so many gray lines. And especially when you have those subconscious messages that are saying you have to be on, you got to take care of this, you got to take care of this. It's very easy to make excuses for why you're always on the back burner. And that's a really challenging place to be in. Can you talk about how you moved into a direction where you started really honing in on yourself and taking care of yourself? And can you talk about your routine, what you do today that is now the priority?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I went through a major soul searching several years. And I'm not talking about like a one time and poof, I felt better. Like I said, meditation was a consistent and foundational tool, but I also redid like a self-guided program with Julia Cameron. I took multiple classes about, how to balance stress. I retooled a lot of my habits. I worked with, I did like tapping a lot. I did acupuncture. I met with a shaman. I mean, I was just like, I'm going to try. Like, there is a better way to show up in the world, and I want to find it. And I can't say it took a long time. And I think that is one of the messages I want to share with your listeners is, even though it might take a long time, if you've been in that like burnout, chronic stress intensity, it's worth it to give yourself the patience and grace to step into something different, because there are different ways to live. Unfortunately, when you practice that for years, I don't think it happens overnight. And so over time, I just had a lot of epiphanies. And I now just look at my life and priorities in an entirely different way. And one thing I know for sure is that pouring into myself is not a selfish act. It's actually generous, because when I'm of service to my family, to my friends, to my community, to my clients, from a place of feeling energized versus depleted, that's when the real magic happens.
Absolutely. And that's such a beautiful transformation in your perspective, because I think a lot of people get stuck in that, like, they do view it to be selfish, and that they do think they have to put everybody in front of them. And when you do make that transformation and realize that, like, when you're full, you are giving people the best version of yourself, rather than giving people that version that, like, maybe they don't want to be around, or a low energy version of yourself. And that's such a huge thing to realize. And it's like, if you're listening to that, like, rewind and play it back, because that is really such a huge point there. And if you can start making those transitions, that's everything. And
yeah.
That.
Go ahead.
Oh,
no, I was just gonna I just had another thought on that, because I think our society feeds us these mommy martyrdom messages, and I'm just over it. Yeah. It's like the mom that's like sacrificing everything. I mean, she's often celebrated.
You're so right.
And I think that what really, really at the end of the day motivates me is for my own daughters and my own mini nieces. I want to find a better way to show up and express my joy and talent in the world without compromising my health and
Mhm.
with also being the mom I want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you are so right. And it is so portrayed because how many times do you hear people like, oh, you're so busy, you do all this stuff for your kids, like it is so praised. But then like when do you hear people say to moms like, wow, you took an hour to like sit and reflect and like really get in touch with your emotions? Good for you. Like that, you don't hear that. So it is these messages that you're getting of like what is like expected. But one thing, I don't know if you listen to Ed Milet, but he talks about most things with kids are caught, not taught. And it's so true. It's like
Mm,
when you're seeing your mom or your parent or whoever it is doing things for themselves, like that is going to have a much stronger pull on them than if you're saying, hey, take care of yourself while I self-abandon. That sounds, like that doesn't, that a kid is too smart. They're going to see right through that. If you're not doing it, they're not going to do it. So if you expect your kids to have a good life, you have to start doing it yourself. And it really is so true.
what a
I
beautiful lesson. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. Can you talk about like what does your typical day look like? What do you do in the morning? What goes on throughout the day? And like what does your nighttime routine look like?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about morning routines, and I have what I call my target and my minimum. So on days like today, when I have had a sick family and I am under an unusual amount of demand, right? It's not my typical. I have like a petite practice that I make sure I never abandon because it really, like, not showing up for myself makes me just feel awful. But I also want to be realistic that sometimes I've got 90 minutes in the morning and I would do my full routine. Today, I'll just give you an example. It's very important for me personally to wake up before my children get up or before anybody in the house needs me. I think about what I like the term fractal, like it's a sacred geometry that just a shape that repeats itself over and over. And that's how I think of our mornings. So my routine is always it's funny. I don't like the word P, but it's what it is. It's called WPM, Wake P Meditate.
Mhm.
Before caffeine, before technology, that's very important to me. I sit, and that's my bare minimum. And so on a day like today, that might be 10 minutes because that's what I could do. And consistency over rigidity is something that I think is really important in terms of being realistic for women.
Mhm.
Uh, on days when I have more time, I probably would be combining meditation with movement and or journaling because those are both important tools for me as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. I like how you have the minimum and then like the ideal, because that's so realistic. Like there are days you have time, some days like are just chaotic, but I love that you still stick to yourself and your routine and your consistency, because that's where you build that integrity and confidence to keep doing it. So
Yes.
can you talk about your like middle of the day? What does your middle of the day look like?
Yeah, so I think one thing I've gotten really good at is time blocking. And so I have certain days and certain times that are blocked out for certain activities and non-negotiable. And so for me, that not only makes sure that I give time to my priorities, but it also helps me say no to things that aren't within my priority. So every day looks a little bit differently. I will say I have the luxury of running my own business and I'm intentionally building it around my life. And so I don't take calls on Mondays or Fridays at all. And it's been honestly amazing. I give myself buffer room to ease into the week and I give buffer room to ease into um, family life. One thing, two practices that I do throughout the day that might serve your listeners. I try not to book anything back to back. I always have at least a 30-minute buffer because I've been that person working at a crazy agency life who was always racing with my laptop and like 2 minutes late to this and whatever. And it's just like, it is a recipe for wrecking havoc, right? And so giving
Absolutely.
myself buffer time on the days that I am working between calls is something that consistently helps me. I also either practice a peace break if I'm feeling like this is just to stay, this is a long answer, but just to take a step back. I think one thing that has really helped me is when I feel that first flicker of heavy or like anxious or like elevated emotion come on, I'm much more keen and aware of it, and I can get to it right away and give it attention. So one thing that helps me a lot, and I call it a peace break, is like if I feel that like tension or stress or just, we all know that feeling of our nervous system kicking in.
Mm-hmm.
I try to immediately rest, break, move, or change scenery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think an old version of me would have been fed into it and been like, oh my God, now I need to lean in and get more done and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And ultimately, like giving myself those opportunities just to pause, take a short break, and come back to things is great.
Mm-hmm.
And then another practice that I work on that I highly recommend, because I think a lot of women, if you're working, whether you're working, I mean, being a full-time mom is a job too. Whether you work at home or you work in an office, whatever you're doing, definitely having a peace break, or sometimes in the meditation world, it's called a bookend at the end of the day. So sometime between kind of wrapping up your daily, whatever you're doing, and your dinner meal, just a pause. It could be like sometimes I do a body scan. Sometimes I just sit in quiet for 5 minutes. Sometimes I do a little bit of visualization of like how I want my night to go. But I think just instead of letting the momentum of our day, especially anything that didn't go our way, build and carry into our evenings, having that intentional pause where it feels empowering to choose what we want to bring into this next part of our 24 hours
Yeah.
is very rewarding.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it is so easy to carry that energy, like that angst, like from work to home. And then now you want to be present at home, and then now you still feel the angst, and now you're frustrated with yourself because you're not present at home. So I love that idea of just that making that transition much more in your control rather than letting life kind of happen and then going through it. But thank you for sharing your routine, because it's like sometimes those things that you hear someone else do, you're like, oh, maybe I could try that. How would that be? And it makes such a difference when you hear what people are doing and what's working for them. And even though it is individualized, you can pick one piece of it and really it can transform your whole day. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
As far as for someone who was like getting started, maybe they're stuck in a place maybe they were you in the past version of yourself, where you were in that work, you're stuck, you're grinding, you're going all the time. What's one thing they could do to just get started to change their mindset on that and not feel so stuck? What's something they could either ask themselves or do to move out of that?
Yeah. Great question. I actually have a tool that I really like to teach because it is so simple, and I can share that. I think when I was feeling stuck, I think a lot of it came from not realizing that I was doing a lot of things out of autopilot, habit, shoulds, and I really hadn't created space to tune in to what I really desired.
Mm-hmm.
So practically, there's the woman who's in stuck zone being like, great, I want some space, but how do I get there, right? So I want to offer this tool. It's called an energy audit, and it's pretty simple. And basically, you can keep a note in your phone, because I feel like that's just easy, or you can keep a journal and try going through preferably a week, but at least a couple days, because every day is a little different. Go through a weekday, go through a weekend day, and just have two tabs. Have a tab that says energizing and a tab that says depleting. Mm-hmm. And keep track. And every time, because there's just little things like we talked about that I think there are energy spirals, right? And so like oh gosh, I just went and got a coffee with a friend. That took half an hour, but I'm like, I feel energized by that. That felt really good, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Sometimes you go to a workout and you're like, I didn't want to go. And I actually felt like crappy afterwards. Like, I think you have to be honest. Like, my body didn't like that. Maybe I don't want to move this type of way. It's like the only thing you have to do is be brutally honest with yourself.
Mhm.
So you
Yeah.
track that and then you have data.
Mhm.
And it's as simple as starting to outsource, stop doing, and deprioritizing things that routinely deplete and de energize us. As you do that, you do create space to prioritize and focus the things that energize you. And I would take it a step further because I know you talk a lot to people who are overachievers and they're so concerned about productivity, you know?
Yep.
So me, which it's not a bad word for me, I just look at it a little bit differently. And I think one major mindset shift is really trusting that doing anything that lights you up and energizes you is productive for you.
Mhm. Yeah.
And even creating time in your calendar that you time block that you treat with the same protection as your workout or your business meeting, whatever your other quote priorities are, and treating it the same way and just seeing how that feels. My gut from working with tons of women to execute this and beyond is that it just ends up allowing them to actually be more productive with ease in the other areas of their life because they're bringing all of this energy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like creating a different relationship with that downtime versus a
Yes.
lot of times we consider ourselves to be lazy. Like I just sat for 5 minutes, like I'm so lazy. But if you can see that as product, your whole it all shifts, and then realizing that like nothing, I guess there's a lot of fear around that. Like if I sit for 5 minutes, everything's going to spiral, nothing will work out the way I hope it, the whole project is going to fall apart. But now you can see how that's actually moving you in the direction that you actually desire, and you're still getting things done. But I love that the actional strategy, like energizing or depleting, that's such a great way to remove yourself from what you're experiencing in a way that you can see it more clearly. So I love that. And just having that data, that's, our brains love evidence. So there's no better way than that to give your brain evidence of like, oh, this is actually how I feel. Because I know that you can get stuck in those traps of like, I should enjoy hanging out with that person. Why don't I feel that? But if you're seeing evidence of like, wow, they're depleting me every time, maybe this is something I should look further into. And do I really have to hang out with this person if I'm getting, in that place every time? So yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. What a great strategy. Really love that. For someone who wanted to work with you, connect with you, where can they find you, and how can they do that?
Yeah. So in terms of social media, like I said, right now I'm pretty focused. So I show up the most on Instagram. So you can come hang out with me there. It's at Whitney Woman. If you're interested in masterminds or women's workshops or learning more about meditation, you can keep abreast of my offers by just checking out my website. It's I'm sorry, it's myelectricideas.com.
Awesome. And I'll put everything in the show notes. So if you're listening, definitely connect with Whitney and follow her stuff. And just thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience and all the great strategies that you gave for people to really move their life forward. So thank you.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And again, for everyone listening, please subscribe to the podcast and then share this episode. If you found value in this, give it to somebody else who could also gain value from it. So again, thank you all for being part of this community. Hey there. Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope it serves you well to start rewiring your brain to create the life you desire. If you found value in this, please share it with a friend and tag me on Facebook or Instagram at Dr. Kelly Kessler.